Hey guys, James from SIKKY Manufacturing. On this second episode of our GTO build, we're going to tear into this car and get rid of the factory suspension, the rear, the fuel tank, and even pull the factory drivetrain in preparation for our engine mount kit design. So I'm going to walk you through what we did in those steps and show you the factory stuff in comparison to the aftermarket upgraded stuff we're installing. So let's get started. 1, 2, 3.
First thing to go on this build is the stock wheels and tires. This 2 1/4 exhaust isn't going to cut it either. Not only is it crimp bent, but it's just not going to have the flow we're going to need for this engine.
Alright guys, as you can see, we've got the 69 GTO up on the lift. Just getting ready to tear in all the suspension work and get rid of these rear drums, putting a whole new rear in it. As you can see, it's all original stuff for the most part. We got up front, run-of-the-mill basic stuff, but everything in here is pretty wore out. You can even see light through the sway bar bushing there. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. See the light shine through. That thing is, everything's loosey-goosey, which once this thing has LS3 in it, making over 500 horsepower, the last thing we want when this thing's going down the road is just be flying all over the place and just loose. So steering rack's getting redone, tightening that all up. Basically everything underneath this car is going to be completely new and solid, just ready to put that power we're going to have to the wheels. So pretty stoked to get this part rolling. We're going to start tearing into it here and putting all these new shiny suspension components on it, and we'll go over that stuff briefly as it happens. So looking forward to it.
Alright, step number 1, we got to get the brake rotor and caliper off and then remove the spindle. Luckily, everything came apart pretty easy on this car. You'd figure you're going to run into some rusty bolts or some cross-threaded stuff after all these years and miles that have been on this stuff, but came apart pretty easy, and we got to get all this old original parts out of the way to make room for all the new components. Now it's time to install the Hotchkiss upper and lower control arms. They have brand new ball joints and polyurethane bushings, so they're going to be real nice and stiff, but also absorb vibration. Here's the coilover, ready to go on. We're going to get that mounted next. And the brand new spindle. Make sure we Loctite and torque everything. As you can see, the new brake rotors and caliper are much larger than the factory stuff, so they're going to do a whole lot better stopping this car.
Alright, so before we move on to designing the engine mounts and transmission crossmember, I wanted to get you up to speed on all the suspension modifications we did to this vehicle. So as you can see, these are not factory brakes or suspension on this car. So the OEM stuff had its purpose at one point or another, but definitely not going to keep up with the power that this car is going to be putting out. And in order to keep it safe and bring it up to modern technology, we went with quite a few upgrades. So there's very little, if anything, left on this car, suspension or brakes wise, that hasn't been replaced. So as you can see in the front here, we got these massive rotors and caliper upgrades, and we went with the Hotchkiss suspension and coilover system. So between the sway bar, the upper and lower control arm, springs, and the coilover, we're really going to be able to dial in the front end of this vehicle and get it finely tuned to handle the power and actually corner and handle the turns the way it should, instead of that big boat swaying feel it had in our initial video of the pre-installation. When we took it on a test drive, it just felt like a yacht sailing the 7 seas. So luckily this car is going to be super tight now, and we're just measuring, getting ready for some much larger wheels to get that contact patch improved as well, just to make sure we're getting all this newfound power to the ground once we get the motor in. So give you guys a walk around on this. So obviously front end's dialed in. We still need to do the steering upgrades, so we're going to actually put a different rack in this car instead of the big manual box style that would be on it originally. You can run that and it's fine, but the one that was on this car was really worn out and kind of beat up, so there's no point in running that. We're just going to update it to a power steering rack and make it a lot easier for anyone to drive. So a big part of this car handling a lot better is going to be this massive sway bar. This in itself is going to steady this chassis a little bit and not get so much roll when you're going through a corner. The coilovers, obviously, there's a lot of benefits to running this kind of setup. We can adjust the ride height, get the fitment perfect with the wheels. Not to mention some of the weight distribution. We can even adjust the quarter balance this car when it's all said and done. So it's going to make a huge difference on the way this car handles, and this pretty much wraps up the front end. Like I said, we've got the steering box in here right now just because we're going to be test fitting it. So the motor mounts and stuff that we designed are going to fit with the OEM steering box as well as aftermarket racks. And just want to make sure that's intact and accounted for when we do our scanning. So we're going to move to the back now and talk about what we did to the rear of this car.
Here you can see the factory shock and spring configuration is separated. We're going to be switching to a coilover design. But we got to get this rear and the stock suspension out of the way. First step, pulling the rear, we got to unbolt the drive shaft and drop it. Make sure we're supporting this gas tank, get it out of the way. Here's the new rear, all crated up right from the manufacturer. Once we get the stock rear out, we're going to get this one up in there and start fitting it with the new coilover setup. Much like the front end, the rear of this car came apart pretty easy to our surprise. In order to prep the chassis for the new coilovers, we had to install and fabricate new brackets that mounted from the frame down to the new rear. Now the rear is in place, we can get the brakes on it, which are a huge upgrade from the factory drums that were on the rear we removed. What a difference these new parts make. The coilovers are going to be awesome and they're going to make this car handle so much better than stock. Not to mention they look really good too.
Alright, as you can see, this is no longer a factory fuel tank in here. We wanted to upgrade the tank to a baffled style tank and also do an in-tank fuel pump just to make sure we're not getting any fuel starvation. This engine's going to require a decent amount of fuel, and we just want to make sure we're giving it everything it needs. Now you can also see the backside suspension here with this beefy sway bar, polished diff cover, and our coilover suspension with the custom brackets we made. This car is going to handle like an absolute monster, so can't wait to get it out and do some test drives with it once it's all said and done. But turned out great, couldn't be happier with the back end of this car. It's definitely going to be a lot better at putting all that power we're making down to the wheels. As you can see, we completely replaced the rear end on this car. The car was open diff before, so nobody wants a one-wheel wonder, especially with the power we're going to be making with this. So we upgraded to a posi unit, real beefy setup. It's going to take all the power this thing's going to put out. Every suspension component in here has been updated, and we did convert this rear to a coilover design mount. It didn't come that way from the factory or where we purchased this rear from. It wasn't an option, so we custom fabbed the brackets and added that coilover mount just to get, again, to be able to dial in the back end of this car and set corner balancing and just deal with trying to get as much traction as you can see. Obviously we got massive sway bar on the back too, really going to tighten up the back end. It's still loose at the moment because we want to wait till it's set down on its wheels and kind of get the final adjustments, but also all the brake lines in this car are getting replaced. Everything was in pretty bad shape, so all new brake lines front to back. This is actually set up for a 1350 Spicer U-joint too, which is pretty much one of the strongest options we've got. So same deal with the back here. Show you the brakes and rotor upgrades and also the fuel system. So show you the fuel tank and the fuel lines. Here's a portion of the fuel line system. This is actually a universal fuel system kit that we as SIKKY manufacture that basically allows you to update a car like this to, we replace the tank and get fuel injected. So we got a feed and return that goes back to the tank, and then a single feed going up to the rail. So this actually also functions like a fuel pressure regulator. Makes the fuel system really simple and easy to put in and not a lot of guesswork. So we're gonna, obviously once the motor's in, we'll continue routing this up to the engine, but for now we kind of got it plumbed in here because we wanted to get the fuel tank and the fuel system up in the car and get the rear in after that. So we we had to get that one out of the way. All right, so just like the front of the car, we wanted to make sure the rear brakes were up to par. So we upgraded the rotors and the calipers to suit the extra power and speed that this car is going to be able to do.
All right, the time has come, my favorite part. We got to get this engine and trans out of the way. So it turns out this engine was pretty tired. It obviously ran and drove during our test drive, but it had quite a bit of leak down in a couple of the cylinders. Some had 50% of the compression they would normally have, so it was tired. It was definitely ready to be removed, so good timing for this swap. Feels good to get this big old boat anchor out of the front of this GTO.
All right, as you can see, there's a whole lot of room for activities in here, which I'm looking forward to moving on to the engine mount and transmission bracket design, because I think there's a lot of opportunity here based on what we've seen with the existing kits that are on the market from some of the bigger names that have been around doing this stuff for a long time. But we're bringing our point of view and our experience from kind of a different side of the mount kit design world, and we're going to apply that to this chassis. And from the preliminary stuff, where we've got some exciting things coming, I think that are going to have quite an effect on people that are doing these swaps in the future using a SIKKY manufacturing kit. So next episode, we're going to dive into the design behind the scenes of how we develop and design a new mount kit, and can't wait to show you guys that. So make sure you like, subscribe, click on the bell so you get notified of the next episode, and we'll see you next time.